It's absolutely better if you want to go to a big agency and be their 30th size client. I would definitely in-house it before I would do that. But you should never do that latter one. There's many, many other better options than that in between in-house or that.
Well, I think a key thing you brought up too, though, is in-house, even if you've got 5 to 10 people, the vision and leadership and management of that team is pretty significant. And, maybe that's the CMO's job or the vice president of marketing or whatever. But I don't know culturally if that works out as well as how it does on the agency side when there's so many other things going on for that team versus just the one sort of singularly focused in-house team.
Welcome to Contrary to Popular Opinion, a podcast hosted by Vuja Dé Digital. In each episode, we bring you provocative topics and novel perspectives around leadership, business, and marketing that defy the norms because exponential growth demands unconventional thinking and visionary action. So open your mind and let's get into this week's episode.
Hey, everybody. This is Todd, Juneau, co-founding partner of Vuja Dé Digital.
Hey, everyone. Kelly Maguire, co-founder of Vuja Dé Digital. Excited to talk about today's topics.
Today's show, we're going to talk about an article that was recently penned by a acting CMO for a company. She wrote a story in a ad trade journal, and I thought it was really well written, and it was about a CMO's sort of journey through life as the CMO and challenges with agencies. And so I don't want to give away the writer or the title, but I want to talk about it because I think it's a really good topic to talk about. And primarily because I actually don't disagree with the CMO and her perspective of this article, which is moving things in-house, away from the agencies and moving things in-house. And I often think, if I was a CMO, what would I do knowing what I know about agencies? And it's a tough call. There are a long list of pros and cons to having an in-house marketing team or having an agency. And so those are some of the things that I'm going to pick your brain about today because I know you've got some commentary about it. So to start off with, this article takes a direction that agencies basically aren't worth the CMO's time anymore because they're just not coming to the table with anything fantastic anymore. That the creative, big out-of-the-box idea is just not there. And this CMO's sort of direction or angle on that is that she can't really figure out why, but it's potentially because the really good, talented people, and this is mainly around the creative agencies, we're a media agency, so I think it applies to media agencies, but it's maybe less applicable in this particular area of big ideas. But we'll talk about that. We'll unpack that as well. Is that these senior creatives basically don't get kept at agencies unless there's a big account billing their hourly rate to pay for them. And whenever that account goes away, if there's not something to assign them to, they get kicked to the curb. And so, the agency can't offer that senior wisdom, that senior talent. So I want to talk today about in-housing versus using an agency. What does that mean? I want to talk about the cost of senior talent. And what does that mean? I want to talk about the challenges on the media agency side about coming to the table with big ideas all the time and whether or not they can actually be executed. And most of the time, in our case, they can't always be funded. But we're guilty if we don't come to the table with fresh ideas all the time. So let's start with just the idea that, maybe agencies are not proving their value anymore from the creative firepower, the big idea coming to the CMO and the CMO saying, I'm going to bring it in-house. I'm going to build an in-house team. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of an in-house team versus an agency?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's definitely a lot of pros and a lot of cons. And it's also unique to the relationships that you're evaluating. I think you hit on one of the biggest challenges around an agency, which is turnover. Turnover is a really big deal. And it's something that I always highlight in my side of things, which is, at the end of the day, yes, you're hiring an agency, but it really only matters who's actually putting the time and the work and the energy into your particular account. It's great if you go and hire the agency that works for Procter and Gamble or McDonald's and they have amazing talent, but you're never going to benefit from that talent at all. Like you're a rounding error to what they are, right? So it's a matter of, who's actually doing the work against it, and is it going to stay around, and are they motivated on your business that certain way? And I think that's a big challenge with agencies on one side of things. In-house, I do tend to agree with you a little bit in that in an even playing field, all things being equal, if I personally, knowing what I know, was to be in charge of a brand, I would probably lean towards the in-house option. But that is only because of my experience and my background and how I would approach that. Because I think in-house comes with a lot of tremendous risks inherently to itself, because turnover is a big problem there as well. You're sort of in an echo chamber of risk where if you have someone that leaves on an in-house, replacing that and basically starting from scratch is a lot different than being in an agency that has people that can kind of fill in and apply learnings, has gotten exposure, has general redundancy around that business, even if they're not the primary content. There's a lot more safety in sort of replacing that and having that scale. I think in-housing is a big problem in the scale of the team that you can have, because yes, you may need someone that buys Facebook ads, but do you have a specialist in every channel? Do you have an analytics specialist? Do you have the ability to tap into resources that maybe not aren't absolutely required to run the business, but have a very nice added benefit and a luxury and an expertise that you wouldn't otherwise have because they're applying it in another way. So you lose access to a breadth of opportunity, even if it's not necessarily absolutely necessary to simply run a marketing program. I think you have a lot of challenges there as well. I think the other problem with in-housing that you get into is, yes, there is a sort of open playing field when it comes to access to technology and tools. But the reality is the majority of the startups and the latest and greatest and cool things, their path to scalability is reaching out to agencies and ingratiating themselves with agencies to get access to clients. And so they pursue agencies, they do the conference events and all of that in order to generate agency relationships to get their product to market. And so we, as an agency, are very well positioned to know what is happening, what is the cutting edge, what's happening out there, and being exposed to that, because we have to be. That's what we're charged to do. And in-house, I feel like you end up getting more and more closed off into running what your responsibility is, focusing on what your hours have to accomplish. And you don't get as much exposure and access to the latest and greatest what's out there, because you have to proactively be going after that. You have to be getting exposed to it. People have to be coming to you, trying to, I literally have dozens of requests for demos and check out this thing and jump on a call and all these sales calls. Like, yes, maybe an in-house team is getting those same requests, but I just don't think it's nearly at the same scale and same pursuit. So it's very different experiences, because in-house, all things being equal, yes, you own the resources, it's more cost effective, it's focused on you. But again, you exponentially increase your risks and you cut off your access to kind of exposure and opportunity that a good agency is both motivated, because your business should matter to them. You shouldn't be their 20th most important client anyway, right? So you should matter to them. They should stay up at night worrying about your business like it's their own. And they should be able to offer redundancy, ideas, exposure, expansion, things that an in-house team would struggle with. So
let me interject a question just to get clarifying on that. So are you equating that, in your opinion, to the size of the potential in-house team? Because this particular CMO cites the fact that the in-house team at this company is 50 plus strong. So let's assume this is obviously a very large brand.
Big client.
50 plus in-house people. I know, but let's take the size of the company maybe into consideration and talk about both sides, right? You're speaking mainly of the small to mid-market type brands that we serve, where an in-house team might be one or two or less than 5 or less. If you're a company that's got 30, 40, 50 people as an in-house team, would you change your opinion about the level of competency and exposure and capability? Does size matter?
It definitely matters. It definitely matters. I mean, if you're anything south of probably 10 million plus, in-house, I think, is really difficult to equate in size. Now, if you are 25, 50 million plus, and you can afford a, double figure 20, 30, 40, 50 person in-house, I mean, you're basically all you're doing is building your own agency just to focus on yourself at that point,
Yeah,
right?
that's the point.
You are agency size as an in-house team. That is very different, right? If you can recreate agency size and value and structure and all of that, and you have that kind of resource and money, yeah, I mean, I could see it. You obviously have to get leadership that's capable of operating that way and overseeing it and managing it that way to get those efficiencies. But resource allows you to do that. But if you aren't that, if you can only have or afford a team of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, less than double digits, again, that's where you start to have a pretty significant trade-off. And even if you get the best people, I personally think it's hard to find a media execution, a person who focuses on Facebook ads, Google ads, programmatic ads, and lives and breathes that. I would find it would be pretty difficult to keep that person engaged and excited and on the cutting edge year after year after year, working on only one exposure, only one element. It's not impossible, but it'd be pretty hard to have a person that is able to do that at scale. And then again, you have that risk of, okay, if you manage to pull that off and you get someone to focus on your business year after year after year in their specialty in their media field, and then all of a sudden they get poached or a better offer or retire or do whatever it is that they want to do, you are in a really bad position to recreate that and replace that in that structure. And it's very, very difficult. So I don't see a lot of pros at that size that outweighs the agency relationship by any means.
Okay, so to be clear, your perspective is really about what you're saying about the in-house thing doesn't work if you probably can't staff 10 plus people. It's if you're 10 or below, you're probably not going to be able to staff enough resources for creative or media or both of those things combined.
Yeah, even if you could, I don't really see where you're yielding much better outcomes out of that. Again, and I am comparing that to an in-house team versus what I would consider a good agency partnership. It's absolutely better if you want to go to a big agency and be their 30th size client. I would definitely in-house it before I would do that. Yeah. But you should never do that latter one. There's many, many other better options than that in between in-house or that.
Well, I think a key thing you brought up too, though, is in-house, even if you've got 5 to 10 people, the vision and leadership and management of that team is pretty significant. And, maybe that's the CMO's job or the vice president of marketing or whatever. But I don't know culturally if that works out as well as how it does on the agency side when there's so many other things going on for that team versus just the one sort of singularly focused in-house team. All right, so let me talk about a different subject that got brought up in this article, which this is one that you have brought up so many times in the past, and I just get a kick out of it every time you bring it up. This CMO talks about how the distaste for when these agencies are brought on, the onboarding process and all the upfront strategy and audience definition and persona and like all of this sort of upfront planning work that has to take place long before the agency will ever take up a position and put a stake in the ground. Okay, let's say this is the direction we're going to go. This CMO's perspective was, look, we've already done all that stuff in-house. I'm not hiring you to do all that. I'm going to give you all that. I need you to take all that and come up with a big idea. But never fails, the agencies want to spend weeks or months doing all this upfront sort of planning and strategy and work and research that the client's like, well, I don't want to pay you for all that. I've already done that work. Now, that's not true in every case. Again, company of this size with a team of that size, they're capable of doing that kind of work. So yeah, maybe you don't want an agency you double paying to have them do that. For the smaller mid-market size brands that don't have those big teams, we've been approached, with certain opportunities, and you've had this debate. You've said to me, I don't need a persona. I don't need to spend a bunch of time developing a persona or 5 personas or 3 personas. I can just logically tell you who the buyer is of this product or service within a fairly close range of accuracy. And I could probably tell you there's 2 or 3 types of buyers, and I don't need to do all that work. Maybe you can describe when you think that kind of work is valuable and when it isn't, because I think the idea that common sense should prevail and logic should prevail, maybe sometimes in place of research, right? We're going to go mine a platform for demographic and psychographic and addressable audience size and all these kinds of things in the media side, or maybe it's different sort of research on the creative side that they have to do, qualitative and quantitative research or whatever they have to do to come up with their ideas. You sort of generally poo-poo that stuff. And this CMO sort of poo-pooed this stuff as well. Man, what agencies do if that's a big part of their revenue and that's a big part of their idea formation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give you an analogy and then I'll answer the question more directly. And I always try and liken the agency client relationship in this way, but I don't think it's often thought about this way. But it's like when you're hiring someone. If you are going to go and hire an experienced senior level director, you're not expecting that person to come in with a 6-month onboarding time before they can really help your company out and train and do all those things, right? You expect that person to be bringing value in the first week because they've done this, they've been there, they understand it. You're hiring that and paying what you're paying to that person because they're going to know what they're doing. Bring in a junior person, someone out of college, a couple years in, you're probably going to give them some leeway. They're going to need to learn the ropes. They're going to need to shadow some people. They're going to need to immerse themselves before they can slowly build value into it. It's very similar to an agency, right? If you know what you're doing, if you're very good at it, and you're not selling a rinse and repeat process, but you're actually selling talent and experience and quality, you should be able to understand that. Again, this is going to sound a little bit, conceited or whatever, but within reason, you can give me almost any client in the world and a little bit of information about them, their website, their background, who their audience is, some competitors and things like that. And I can probably get you almost 90% into who you should be selling to, how you should be entering the market, what a media plan looks like to control that audience. Now, can you fill that out? Can you massage it? Can you improve it over time? Can you collect data that takes you in different directions? Absolutely. But the vast majority of the most important, how should I spend my money and who do I need to be trying to use dollars to influence and market to get the results that I want? Anyone that really understands what they're doing, is good at what they're doing, should be able to do the vast majority of that work, the bulk of it, without AI or some magical thing telling you this is the audience. Like, I can tell you who your typical clients are, and anyone who knows how to buy media can understand their engagement rates and where they're at. So I think the answer is the reason that agencies want that is because it shows up better, it's fancier. You can give a document that says, look at all these stats and this data and this information, and you get this book and you're like, this is what you're paying me for. There's something tangible here. There's something that you can see. There's 30 pages of research and you can't deny that took a lot of time. And that's why you're cutting the check that you're cutting. And that's why you're paying me a big setup fee and doing all of these things and extracting dollars versus, yeah, I'm buying your media and I'm going at it. But it's weird because doing the right thing and going straight at it and getting in there, it's easy to feel like you're paying this fee. And it's like, well, all right, did you really do all that much for me? But I'm not seeing all this work. I'm not seeing all this shown stuff. It's this weird disconnect between true value and perceptual value that actually exists. And for me, I would rather pay for someone that kind of has the confidence, knows what to do, gets in market, is smart about things, and is kind of working as they go a little bit more than like, hey, give me a month to put in all this work to give you a bunch of research that's going to tell you 90% of what you pretty much know about your business anyway.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I mean, maybe with age comes wisdom. Isn't that the saying? You've just lived long enough to see things. I mean, yeah, I think it's easier for somebody who's been in business for 30 years to think about that stuff than maybe a junior person, and maybe you don't. But obviously, there's a lot of big agencies and research firms out there that would, want to strangle us for talking about it that way and, diminishing their value. And many of those agencies are friends of ours that run those kinds of agencies. And so there is value to it in some way, shape, or form. I think on the media side, specifically for us, maybe it's not as upfront valuable. I think it's easier for us to look at some basic stuff and sort of understand how an
And
ad
to be
impression.
clear, I'm not to interrupt you, but there's value in enhancing, in validating, in growing. That I don't say there's no value in it. I definitely we look at research things, but it's after we've engaged. It's after we've taken advantage of the known and we're starting to work more on the margins or to solve problems that have arisen and we need to get answers to. It's not valuable to do the core of the work and the thing that you're primarily getting engaged to do. But it can be valuable, certainly, to take the next step or to evolve into the next phase or to do the next thing. I just have a problem saying that I can't buy media until I do all these things. It's a cop out and it's not right. Then you shouldn't be getting hired to do that if you can't do the bulk of what needs to do pretty much out of the gate. Again, you can leverage it and take advantage and expand what you're doing on those things, but none of that should be informing the core. You should understand what the core is out of the gate. So
Okay.
I don't want it to make it sound like I don't think there's any value to it.
So now there's a bunch of media agencies out there that hate you for saying that.
I mean, look, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, it's just our perspective on things, right? And that's why our show is called Contrary to Popular Opinion, because our opinion is not always that popular. All right. So I want to spin this in a different direction. So again, the CMO is talking about the power of the creative idea and the big idea from the creative agencies. And that's really what this CMO is craving, as being the most important thing to sort of augment their in-house team, and why the purpose would be to hire a creative agency. The article goes on to talk about media, which is what we do, as a tactical thing. And the one thing that we have struggled with, not a big struggle, but I think maybe all agencies in our position struggle, is I view creative as this one big idea. It's a moment in time where the creative director comes up with this beautiful idea about what the TV spot's supposed to be in the campaign, and that's the creative execution, and that's a one-time thing, right? That has a shelf life. It's a creative concept, a creative idea that has a shelf life. It gets created, it gets put in market, and then eventually it has an end state to it. Media, on the other hand, what we run is sort of immune to that, and we run whatever the creative is. And so we could have a media relationship with a client that could span, and as most of our clients do, many, many years. So if the CMO is sort of thinking about the creative agency as, wow, they bring me this one big cool creative concept every 6 months or whatever, and that becomes our campaign, and that's the big fresh idea. One of the things that we've seen is that how do you do that with media? How do you constantly innovate, evolve, keep fresh and exciting media when it's not incumbent upon this cool creative new idea that's for the campaign? It's just a distribution. It's a conveyor belt. It's a distribution outlet. It can become very stale and monotonous, especially if you're running media for a client year after year after year after year. So for media agency folks that might listen to this, how do you, Kelly, want to keep a client excited about media? Can you do it? Do they listen? Can they afford it? How does that work best in your mind?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm going to try and go off in a few different areas on this topic. I'll try and organize this and keep it in because there's a lot to cover here. Starting with kind of the big creative idea and how that plays with the media execution, because even that in and of itself is a really interesting concept to think about, because in my mind, there's two main ways that a campaign or a creative concept come together. Now, of course, there's a lot of other ways, but I'm going to distill it down into a simpler version here. You can have the big creative idea that you really want to put out in the world. And that represents a bit of a risk, right? Because you're saying, this is how I want to talk about my brand or product or service or whatever it is. And I'm going to deliver it under the hopes that it lands and that it hits and that everyone takes from it what I want them to. Now we've seen there's endless numbers of campaigns where I'm sure someone thought it was a great idea and it just fell completely flat and didn't do what they wanted, right? So again, it's risky because now what you're using media is you're saying, I have a thing that I want to put in the world and I want it to accomplish something. And media's job is to then take that and then match that up and get high visibility exposure and maximize its yield and track its outcomes and all of that. And again, I liken that to a big swing and a big risk, because that can fail just as easily as it can take off, because you're trying to force something that you want to happen because you think it's a cool creative idea. The other way is what I would consider is often talked about more as the performance marketing direction, which is we have an engine to deliver messaging. We talked about this. I have an engine to get 3 to 5 seconds of someone's attention. I can identify this as someone who should or would benefit from what I have to offer. I just simply need to connect with them and either make them aware or answer a question for them or provide them the conversion path. And now you're saying, okay, if I'm going to invest these dollars to get those 3 to 5 seconds of attention in an ad, what should I say? What value should I convey? What question can I answer? How can I stand out? How can I generate attention? Okay, cool. And so that's kind of, more of a bottom up, right? Where you're saying, I'm going to generate this attention. I need to maximize the yield of that attention versus I have something I want people to see and I'm going to force people to see it and hope it hits. These are very, very different things that I think is in there. So all of that goes around into the big ideas for media. So again, media serves a role. It is creating a communication channel with the audience that you want to reach, and it's delivering a message. Now, you can get creative in that, but the problem that you run into, and this is another size of client issue that I'm going to talk about, because this doesn't apply to Red Bull and Starbucks and Coca-Cola that have all the money in the world to try everything in the world, and they've exhausted things and they just need to go to the next thing and spend money. This exists for the client that doesn't have the biggest budget in the world and has to be very prioritized on where they spend their next dollar. And the problem that you run into is a lot of times where you should really spend your next dollar is oftentimes not the most exciting, coolest, shiniest new thing. It is, I'm still only 40% of my maximum Facebook ad yield, or I'm only 20% of my share of voice in Google search ads, or I haven't even tried to do everything I can do in programmatic yet. And so oftentimes it's like, hey, I have some more money or I want the next idea. And you come across with this boring, like, okay, well, we should put more money into your search campaign. Well, that's not very exciting, but it's also the smartest thing to do with your next dollars. Maybe once you've gotten past the 50 or 60% share of voice mark, you should go do the shiny, fancy, new awareness-driven ad that helps you out. But honestly, all this is coming back into is understanding your objectives in your media, the sacrifices you're willing to make for the shiny new objects, where you're participating and competing and where your next best dollar is. And even if you're not being brought the best, coolest, most fun idea, as long as someone is looking at, here's why you should do the boring thing before the exciting thing. Here's where you stand in the mix and when that would make sense to do that next thing. Here's the capability so that you're aware of it, even if I don't recommend doing it yet. Knowing that it's being looked at, knowing that it's being evaluated, even if it's not time, that's important. But it is hard to make sure that you're feeling like you're getting the latest and greatest because you're seeing that shiny sales object. I can't tell you how many times we've talked to clients and they're like, well, should we be doing this thing? And I'm like, I mean, yeah, that's a cool thing. You could do it, but you are 12 much more important things away of funding before you ever get to that being the next thing that you should do. But it sounds so cool and it gets you all excited and it's really hard to manage that. So I think as long as you genuinely get the sense that your partner continues to critically evaluate the business, genuinely analyze what the right thing to do is, I wouldn't knee-jerk react to, I'm not getting the big, shiny new idea, as much as I would say, I'm not getting any ideas. I'm not getting any POVs. I'm not getting a perspective as to why I shouldn't do that and why I should do this. You want someone that is thinking about it and pushing you, but you don't want someone who's just giving you something fancy just to look good if it's not in the best interest of your business. It still needs to be tied to an objective and a risk evaluation protocol and understanding, is this the right thing to do? How does this fall on my list of priorities?
Boy, Kelly, you're boring.
Yeah, I mean, look,
all you want to do is the boring stuff. But
yeah, I get it. I mean, that is true. And that's, I mean, to be fair, actually, I'm going to defend myself a little bit. That's not true. I absolutely love coming up with the creative idea. I would love to do a Super Bowl ad or a fancy podcast or all these types of things. It's just, you got to have the right client. And you have to believe that it is going to move the needle in the right way. And then again, that it is the next best place to spend a dollar. I would love, by all means, if there's someone at a brand who's spending $50 or $100 million that wants our expertise on there, I would absolutely love to be these huge, wonderful, amazing ideas. But in the arena that we play in, we have to drive performance and be mindful that those dollars work. I can't, Red Bull, I could say, yeah, we sponsored a space athlete jumping out of space and it fell a little flat. It didn't get in there. No big deal. We do that for one of our clients. It's like, well, that's half the budget gone and we're screwed for this next year.
Yeah, no, I'm only joking. It is true. It puts us in this weird place, at least in the mid-marketplace, is that, yeah, we get criticized if we don't bring fresh new ideas to the table all the time. But all those fresh new ideas, like you said, are generally either unaffordable or too risky to take money away from the ROI producing tactics that are in market, that it doesn't make sense. It could cost the CMO their job.
Sometimes there's other blockers too. There's just, you need access to data that they don't have. You need creative resources that they don't have. You need a platform that doesn't exist. Like, there are actual blockers that, again, someone pitching you this shiny sales idea, they don't need to worry about all of that. They just need the bait that gets your attention, that gets you on the phone to listen. And then that causes you to question us. Why didn't you bring me that idea? Well, now I have to answer, well, it's because there's 4 reasons you literally can't do this. I didn't want to waste your time with it.
So that is going to be a good segue into the next show we're going to do, which we're going to talk about the pitch process and the agency decks that contain a lot of smoke and mirrors, snake oil, bells and whistles, whatever we want to call it, but oftentimes are things that are technically not even feasible or possible because of, like what you just said, there's not enough data to do, certain things or whatever. So we'll hold that off for the next show. Last thing I have for you, which I'm going to ask you every show is, and I bet you didn't prepare for this, so I'm going to see what comes top of mind. That's the point. What is the last ad you recall seeing?
Ooh, I was not prepared for this one, and I'm not having one immediately come to mind, which is interesting.
Isn't it? We're in the business of advertising. I asked you what's the last ad you remember seeing, and you cannot recall a single ad. That's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, on the spot, I'm trying to think, because I do mostly streaming TV. Nothing's jumping out there that's out of the norm. Online, I'm not having one, to be honest.
Well, advertisers,
someone needs a bigger idea to get my attention.
Somebody needs a bigger idea to get Kelly Maguire's attention. We'll close on that.
Which is funny because I'm a consumer. I buy things too. So maybe some people should advertise me.
You are a consumer of all things soccer and footwear and all kinds of stuff. We'll wrap it up there. And the next show, we are going to talk about sort of the smoke and mirrors behind our industry. I think that'll be a good topic. And there's another great article in another trade journal that covers the ad industry where a writer penned a really neat piece about that. And I want to pull it apart and have a conversation with you. So we'll talk next time about that topic. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Contrary to Popular Opinion, where we challenge you to think independently, push the limits, and take uncommon action so you can achieve game-changing results in your business and your life. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.